to our third session. Right now, this third session is going to be about publishing in the digital age, rethinking the dissemination of scholarship in the evolving digital landscape. We have Sarah Ritchie with us. She's a journals publishing manager at Wiley. And Sarah is a passionate people person with an affinity for community and effective communication, experience in relationship management, using data and stories to convince and inform our partners. Sarah is going to talk for us for about 40-50 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. We can remind people that they can post their questions in the Zoom or in the app for the event, and we will be reading them also. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So as introduced, I'm Sarah Ritchie and I work for Wiley, and I'm hoping that this presentation will give you a little slice into the publishing life and the landscape, what's really a big change now that we're all on the internet and using digital methodologies and forums. So as again was said, I've got the Hoover app open right now. So at some points I'm going to ask for some feedback, and it would be great for those who aren't in the room to use the app or just shout out any answers that you may have. So next slide, please. My clicker is not working, but I'm sure it'll be fine. So to give a broad overview of why this is such a big change, this timeline is really important to tell the story of publishing and what's changing within the system. So as you can see, the first box is here, the first journal is published and traditional subscriptions are created. Then, subscription prices were based on the value of the journal and revenues dependent on the number of subscribers. So the journal really has the emphasis of value. It's the place where everyone goes to find their research. It's the main vehicle for research to be read and shared. The internet then disrupted all of this, and through this, that meant that publishers could offer what we call big deals, wherein multiple journals can be bundled into one subscription. So rather than, each individual journal being placed individually out there, they're part of a collective, which kind of widens the amount of research that can be accessed and disseminated in that way. Then through the internet, obviously, when things are available, people want to read them. So that began the open access movement, which really took hold in the 90s. And it was around this time that it began to challenge the traditional subscription model. And we've seen, where the journal used to hold value, that has now shifted, and the article is the main vehicle for disseminating research. So just to give you an idea of why this is so important, bang, with the PowerPoint, this first period was 400 years. The next period, about 30. And the point where we've seen this challenge is only within around about the last 5 years. So that really demonstrates, this long history of one style of working, which has now really been completely turned upside down and shifted the way that we consider publishing as a business, but also as a research community accessing this work. So that is the basis for this presentation, really. On my next slide, we'll talk through what it actually means to publish in this digital first landscape. I've started off with a fun quote, which I think sums up the experience in many ways. So researchers produce 21st century research written in 20th century technologies, published in a 17th century format. So, really nicely reflecting the timeline. So we're working to change that, let's give the researchers tools that match modern day technologies. But what else were we seeing here? So firstly, an emphasis, like I say, on individual articles rather than in issues or even journals. And that means a kind of dynamic shift in terms of power, and pressure between the journal editors and also authors. Secondly, we're seeing a growing demand for accessibility, and that is in terms of open access, so access to the research itself, but also according to disabilities, and also, accessing costs for entering publishing more generally. Thirdly, this whole change of momentum and ways of gathering information means that we need to change the way that we assign value. And again, we'll see that shift how we associate revenues and costs with publishing. And that does affect, down to the author at this point. Finally, it's not all scary change. Some of it really does represent opportunities for new research. So we can see, borderless partnerships, new workflows, online tools, or vast repositories that really cut down on the time it takes to do the research in order to get published. So yeah, that's kind of the agenda for this session. So let's talk a bit more about, digital first discovery. So what that means in terms of the issues and also the articles that we do publish. So on the next slide, you'll see, according to Wiley research, around 50% of what we publish is accessed through search engines directly. That means that researchers are looking for research directly through keywords rather than looking necessarily by journal basis, at least online. So what that means in terms of the larger picture, there's another thing, yep. Having more articles in other journals will just make you more visible in an online space. So journals that feature more frequently in search results will be found more easily by researchers, which means a higher readership, which means they're more highly cited, which means that people will choose to publish perhaps in those journals first. So really what this means is that there's a growing competition, growth more generally, and more really is more in this online space. So what that means for the issues themselves, if we're looking and seeing, everything's coming article by article, then do we really need the issue? So coming up, special issues are still a really important tool. What that means, if somebody searches for their keywords and find an article that suits their research, they'll then be able to see a whole collection which is likely to be based on the same kind of keywords. So they'll have a really stronger connection to a journal and be able to access more research that's really relevant to their needs. However, that's not the only option available. So if a journal is not so potentially interested in running special issues, that's a lot of timing that's necessitated across many different fronts. We also have the option to move forward with continuous publication. Next little picture. So there's an example here of ecology and evolution, which follows a continuous publication workflow, which essentially means anything that is ready for publication is opened up straight into like an issue type thing, but it's not really an issue. It's closed at certain periods, so that could be every month, every quarter, every year even, and at that point all of the articles are sent through to Web of Science. So that just means that there's not so much time pressure for editors. We don't need to worry about running orders, and it can take a lot of pressure off already busy editors. It's not an option for everyone, but it is one of the things that we see as maybe a change that could be facilitated through online publishing. So obviously, we've said special issues are really important. So how can we do that in this space? Well, there is, in this case, the virtual issue is an option, and it actually has a lot more range compared to a special issue. So special issues being thematic or content collections. You'll see an example of a virtual issue page here, and that is for PSJ, another PSO journal. What this means is that virtual issues can collect articles from the whole breadth of a journal's timeline and can continue to collate articles into this collection. So again, if an author's going in with those keywords, they'll find the article and it will say, as it says there, oh, there's another thing. It will say what the virtual issue is about, and if that's relevant again to the researcher's needs, then they are driven back to the article, given more of a chance to engage with the journal's research. This is something that we've also emulated within Wiley ourselves. So the next image will show Rise, which is a microsite that we've built in-house, where we collect articles based on different categories according to their relation to social equity. And we collect those so that researchers have a really defined and easy to use pool of resources that can help them in their research according to those needs. But it's not just the issue that's seen changes as we've moved to an online format. Next slide will show you how. So these are just a few of the examples of the way in which the internet gives a bit more breadth and variety to what we can expect from research that we publish. Firstly, embedded multimedia, we can include videos, we can have really quite intricate ways of displaying knowledge and research. And actually, you know, again, that's a way that we can really encourage people to use our research. So we've seen articles with embedded videos see about 30% more usage than matched articles. So just articles that have similar topics published in similar types of journals. Another example from the PSO is that we translate abstracts. So that allows for researchers to find research in their target language and really expand in who can collaborate and how. Finally, data availability is another way in which online publication just allows for more resources to be pooled and to be shared for those using the resources. No more need for filing for back data. It can be easily linked, and you know, there's preprints, all kinds of services available to really support these networks of research. So that's kind of some changes in the very base levels of what we publish. How are people accessing it? Next slide. So again, like I say, this is going to talk a bit about open access, but also accessible formatting and making sure that anybody who wants to read the work is able to do so. So this really, the drive particularly towards open research as a general term, please, was really driven by European Commission and European institutions and funders, although we'll see that is a lot more global now. And they term open research as a broad term, covering the many exciting developments in how science, or also research, is becoming more open, accessible, efficient, democratic, and transparent. The open science revolution is driven by new tools for scientific collaboration, experiments and analysis, which make scientific knowledge more accessible by professionals and the general public anywhere at any time. And that's a really important point. You know, it's not just for other researchers. This is a movement that allows anybody to access research, you know, inspiring the next generation of researchers, or, you know, somebody who's interested for a Twitter argument and wants to know actually what is the real basis for this and how can I learn more about a social change that's ongoing. So in the next slide, you'll see that there are three kind of main pillars that hold up this open research movement. That facilitate faster and more effective research discovery. So first and foremost, open access, which we've mentioned slightly, you know, removes the barriers to published research and makes it so that research can be read by anybody. This is, of course, only available through the internet, as published materials generally have to be bought, printed. Open data is a really communal kind of movement. So you'll see Figshare and Dryad as two of the facilitators for open data. But there's also, you know, FAIR principles that we operate by and use at an industry level to really make sure that data is as open and shareable, interoperable, reliable as possible. Just to expand the rate of discovery, as kind of going back to that initial definition of open research would suggest. Finally, open practices really traverses a wide range of potential changes and innovations within publishing. So you'll see registered reports, which is where we publish our hypothesis before we publish the results to kind of keep any kind of modification down. You know, research is research. You don't have to have wild results for it to be important. What's important is making sure that the research is sound and good and actually serves a purpose and proves what it needs to. Authoria is a kind of author collaboration tool, so it really facilitates international collaboration as well as across different time zones and places. And, you know, there's so many examples up there that really support allowing people to come together to make the most out of research and also to reward the work that goes into it. And, you know, the next slide goes into a bit more about the OSTP 2022 memo, and I'm not sure who's read it in this room. I think I can see a few faces who may have. But this new memo from the US really shows how open access as a demand is growing. This memo was issued by the White House in 2022 and essentially asks that all research which was federally funded within the US be made publicly available, publicly accessible, without any embargo or delay after publication, which is a big change on what it was previously. So it's asking for funding agencies to develop approaches and timelines for sharing other federally funded research data, even those not associated with peer-reviewed scholarly publications. So this is just a huge expansion of all the data and research available from the US. And this was expected to be updated and implemented within 180 days from August 25th, 2022. And again, you know, this public access is not a term that as publishers we've used much, but it really drives home that a lot of these pushes are not just, you know, to keep research, to expand research beyond just researchers, so that it is more of an everyman's game. So, I mean, to delve more into open access, next slide. Does anybody here have a definition of open access that they would like to share? Anyone have good experience with open access? That's fine. I mean, again, Hoover, if you'd like to step in with any comments, because honestly, open access is a real big talking point, but often it's not necessarily explained. It's just there, and there is a real need for it. And there can be questions about, you know, how is this funded? How can we make sure this happens? Why do we need to fund it? So if we put up the answer, I guess, the definition of it can be called, you know, open access is a set of principles and a range of practices through which research outputs are distributed online free of cost or other access barriers. And of course, that's free of barriers to access. With open access, barriers to copying or reuse are also reduced or removed, applying an open license for copyright. So this is also where it varies from just, you know, making something free to read online. It also really frees up the copyright and all the licenses that go along with publishing an article. So there are two main types of open access. There is green open access, which is where an article self-archives a version of their article in an online repository. There's no charge associated with this, but this normally takes place after an embargo. So for Wiley, authors can only archive the submitted version on acceptance, and then the accepted version after this 12 to 24 month embargo period. And we use our standard licenses for this. Of course, going back to the OSTP memo, we see there is a bit of tension there because they ask for different needs. And that may be where we have to go down a route of gold access, which is which we see more often, and is what gives, you know, that open access right onto the first publication page. And that's where an author pays an article publication charge, or an APC, and the article is made freely available online straight away, so it can be read, downloaded, and is available to share. This APC really varies by journal and also can by subject. There's also opportunities for waivers and discounts depending on the journal and the author's circumstances. So the way that you can publish a gold open access article in Wiley can be in a fully gold open access journal, where everything published in this journal is open access, or in a subscription journal that offers open access as an option. And like I say, that uses a different kind of license, which is broad across open access, whereas the CTA and ELA licenses are Wiley specific. So how does this all fit in to the larger story? Next slide, please. As you'll see from the arrow coming down, in a minute, this really demonstrates that challenge that we spoke about earlier in the model, and this is where we're seeing the change in revenues. So my next question to the audience, does anybody know what a transformational agreement is? Or have any experience with them? So next slide when you can. So essentially, transformational agreements are our way as a publisher to take some of that onus off the author themselves. So if you get the magic answer up. So these transformational agreements, it goes back to that subscription bundle that we used to have across all of our journals with institutions or consortia. And essentially what that does is it takes a part of that budget and allocates it towards the publish side of a read and publish deal. What this does is it means that consortia are not paying extra money for all this freely available research. I think last year, a third of the content published by Wiley was open access. So obviously we can't charge for that. So instead we've renegotiated our agreements so that that burden of paying the APC is taken on by the consortia. So for authors who are a member or affiliated with an institution with a deal are able to just press a button and it magically goes through to OA. So as I said earlier, you know, there's read and publish deals, which is what we see most of the time. So the primary part of the budget is put towards reading with an allocated part for publishing, and that grows generally over the period in which we have a contract. An example of this is our Wiley agreement with JISC. And, you know, here you'll see this pie chart represents the amount of papers that our deals cover by publisher, and that's available in the ESAC registry, which is openly available to anybody to access. And you'll see Wiley's got a really great share of this, and part of that is those deals with JISC, for example, where we have over 9,500 papers covered for open access publication. I think overall, this pie chart covers 250,000 articles. So it really is growing, and we're seeing more and more coverage to help authors through this new landscape. So just to show a bit more in depth about what our TAs or transformational agreements look like. Next slide. So this is a very recent slide created this very month. It shows where Wiley is currently with our transformational agreements. You'll see we've got 59 in place that cover over 65,000 articles worldwide. Last year it was probably about 55,000, so that is growing, and we're expecting to see more and more be signed as this year continues. This is the time when we get a flurry of announcements come through, so it's a really, really exciting time, and well, I'm sure you'll be seeing more details when the annual account comes through about what we've done this year. But as I say, you know, there's increasing, so as this says, I mean, this increasing pressure on the traditional subscription model means that we are under increasing pressure to really make sure that we can be there to support authors through, and make sure that, you know, people can continue to access funding and the articles already out there. So in terms of accessibility beyond just being able to read the article, next slide, please. Wiley really takes accessibility as part of our core work. So to quote the W3C accessibility initiative, making the web accessible benefits individuals, businesses, and society. Web accessibility means that tools, websites, and technologies are designed and developed so people with disabilities can use them, and more specifically, perceive, understand, navigate, and interact and contribute to the web. And this is really demonstrated not only through our regular practices, but we are innovating all the time. So we've got a new app for Wiley Online Library, which gives access to all journals. And obviously that is also kept up to these standards. NJD is our new way of processing articles through into HTML and PDFs, and it really makes it a lot more accessible. I don't know how many of you have been there struggling to copy and paste from a PDF, and sometimes it doesn't work, or the F's come out as a symbol and it's all a bit strange. But this really minimizes those kinds of errors, and that also in turn makes it so text to speech is a lot more easily used and just makes all of the research again more accessible beyond just accessible. Cool. So on to point 3, when you can. Obviously, this bigger world of the internet and publishing through it means that there's increased competition. As I've said, more is really more here. But that also means we've got new ways that we can interpret what's happening. Oh, I think it works now. Sorry, I've been just making you do this all this time. So firstly, as we move into the digital age, previous methods of ascertaining value may become less relevant while others emerge. So a great example of that is altmetrics, which determines value through, engagement with social media, with news outlets, blogs, also other websites where you can read research such as Mendeley, and also dimension citations. But also, the move away from print has unlocked options for measuring value previously unavailable. So, if you've got a print copy, who knows how many people have read it? Who knows how long they stayed reading the article for? But with the internet, obviously, we can use really precise readership and download numbers, which includes, downloads by country, but also by access type. So we can really measure the difference between these articles which remain behind subscription and also ones that are open access. This also means that the way that we present data will change. So we've recently become a signatory to DORA, which is the Declaration on Research Assessment, which essentially aims to open up the way that scholars assign value to journals and research outputs. So I'm sure a lot of you will have known of the impact factor, which has a lot of presence and traction within the research community. But we, as a part of this signature, we will be moving towards including other metrics, including altmetrics, including Scopus scores, SJRs, to really ensure that we're giving that breadth of information that is available. Also, in reflection of this, the impact factor itself is changing the way that it presents its data. So as of this year, all journals in the Emerging Sources Citation Index will also be given an impact factor, as well as any journals in the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. As well as that, it will be changing from 3 decimal places to just 1, which might take out some infighting. I don't know. I'm intrigued to see. I'm sure we all are. So that will be a really interesting announcement this year. On those lines, however, I know the impact factor is still really important to a lot of people. So it's worth mentioning that in this state of growth, the impact factor is not necessarily at risk. For years, many have had the kind of thinking that if you maintain a low number of articles, then the chances are they'll be higher quality and you'll get more citations. But we've seen, that's not necessarily the case. And we've done a lot of research internally to really test this theory. And you can see this was led by chemists. So these particular examples are from Chemistry and Asian Journal, and also Chem plus Chem. And you can see that after really starting to try to drive acquisitions and get more articles to be published, we saw an increase in the impact factor. And then this is across all Wiley outputs. With an impact factor, you'll see that for those that grew, the percentage that went up in their impact factor was higher than the ones that shrank. And, so less impact factors went down in cases where journals grew. So just to round this off, open access really equals an opportunity. Again, this is research across Wiley Online Library journals and articles. And we saw that publishing open access really can elevate your audience. We saw 3.2 times as many downloads, 1.5 times as many citations, and 2.7 times the altmetric score for open access articles published in hybrid journals. So those that are initially subscription, but allow the option for open access publication. Cool. So this is, I think, maybe the most fun bit. You can tell me if I'm wrong. But this is where, the internet can create new routes for research. So technology, beyond how it's disseminated, also really impacts how we research. A great example, we're starting from Wiley, because I'm from Wiley. A great example for this is the Wiley Digital Archives. As shown here, for those of you who don't know, the Wiley Digital Archives restore and digitize catalogues of archives from some of the world's most influential academic and scientific societies. So we've worked with the British Association for the Advancement of Science, New York Academy of Sciences, Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, bit of a tongue twister, Royal College of Physicians, Royal Geographical Society, and have worked across many other groups along those ways. But beyond that, the site is really, really rich in the way that it uses the internet. So you'll see here an example of automated text recognition. So really this completely brings together the research experience. Rather than going through multiple stacks of hard to decipher writing, you can literally do word searches within the archive and find exactly what you're looking for. As well as that, these documents are geotagged, so you can have a really clear idea of where they're coming from, and also go to that map and zoom in and find other resources that might also be aligned with this project that you're doing. Furthermore, we can export these handwritten data sets, even when they're like numbers. We can put those so they can be downloaded in Excel, and you can immediately start working on those numbers. It's fantastic. And it can be translated into 105 languages. Why can't every website work like this? So again, that enhanced metadata and all those kind of things combined really make it a really useful tool that can, create connections across archives, disciplines, timelines, and your keywords. There's a quote here from Dr. Catherine Nichols, which really exemplifies that. So with the search terms I use, the collocations tool gives me a better sense of what's available in the archives. I'm able to click a word and quickly be led to other information to access a larger macro view, and there can be real value in that. And I can see how that would work. There's the list of the collections we have. So there is a free trial available. I'm not here to sell you it, but it's really interesting. I like the website. Another example, which again is a Wiley example, there's loads available on the market, but this was developed through our partner Atopon. So this is Citrus, which is essentially collates research according to your interests. It creates a single place for keeping up top of developments, and you can choose, your topics, and these collections and suggestions for research and news constantly improve with AI to keep up with your interests and your needs. You can also create a personal library, which can be used offline, and that's integrated entirely with all the manuscripts, notes, and annotations. But of course, it's not just things with Wiley. These are just some of the most basic examples. I'm not a researcher in my first regard, I'm a publisher. However, I can see the value of tools such as these. Digital humanities has been working with computer science for the last 40 years. But even, simple things such as I would take for granted a Qualtrics survey, but, that took out, I don't know how long it must have taken to print out and send out interviews and to wait for them to be sent back and to have to remind people through post, having all of that available through the internet and to be able to be really easily digestible and translated into data and graphs without really much second thought has changed the research game. Obviously, R, the integrated suite for data manipulation, calculation, and graphical display, really simple terms, allowed many more people to enter into stats and other kinds of research like that. Collection Builder is an example of an open source tool framework which creates digital collections and exhibit websites, so that are, again, really driven by metadata and can power modern web technology. And last, I've just included an example from Walrus, which is a tool for creating large graphs which work in a three-dimensional space, so you can see, both really macro detail, but also really localized details along the way as well. I'm sure you all have things that you use, and maybe put them in the chat, your favorite tools that you like to use. That's fine by me. So that's kind of on the research side, but also, in disseminating research, publication in a journal is not the only way forward. Here is an example from an Oxford Digital-based image archive called Mana al-Atar, and that translates to Guide to Archaeology in Arabic. This was set up, I think, 8 years ago, and the director, Judith Mackenzie, describes it as a benchmarking exercise, essentially, from which one can measure baselines of monuments and buildings in Africa and Middle East. So you can measure the degradation of these places as they are damaged or destroyed as a result of conflict. This will then be used with its records of buildings before this damage and create a vital resource that works on repairs, restoration, and reconstruction post-conflict. So, this is an example of how open research networks can work beyond just scholars and also, act as a lost artifact of a bygone era, but also, just raise awareness about certain things happening in the world. So yeah, again, this ensures that it's not for a certain audience only, and can be really crucial for governments, local leaders with resources in post-war settings. So another example of that kind of work, and this really shows, how the internet and research create new opportunities to build and preserve knowledge. Iconim is a project comprised of architects, engineers, and graphic designers. And it was set up by a small team in Damascus in 2014, where members trained local archaeologists on their field surveys to help them collect visuals for a database. The typical information gathering for this was conducting really fast photographic surveys and then using photogrammetry to process and stitch them together to reconstruct a 3D visualization of these buildings. So, this works, again, to really preserve memory and create a digital archaeology that allows for memory and preservation to continue for future generations. And this is particularly, really important when some of the ones that have actually been recorded here have since been destroyed by ISIS. So you can go back and compare them to these 3D iterations available online. So, also the internet allows us to create borderless networks. I've included this example here, which is again from a Wiley journal. Well, a mix of Wiley journals, and essentially it's a call for papers on neurodiversity. So a really wide-ranging but really pertinent topic. And the fact here that there's think there's about over, I think 33 journals involved here, really shows the kind of depth and width that is really inherent to lots of research. And, creating these networks is really key to making sure that we consider all that needs to be considered in the face of such things in our lives. So my final example, no, not second to final example, of a borderless network was created by an editor who I work with. And this is essentially a really interactive map, which shows females Islam scholars across the world, which I think is a really great resource and, can be used to really further the way in which we think about how we connect with other researchers. This is a quote from a HuffPost piece, but essentially collaboration between research in different countries only really began after the decline of the Cold War. So this kind of international collaboration is actually really new to research. And we can use the internet in multiple ways to really bring it forward and to catapult it into the 21st century. So that has been happening, and we see that nowadays about 35% of all research papers are a result of international collaboration, which is about a 40% increase from 15 years ago and double since 1990. So you can see that's on a really strong trajectory. And finally, we're in a borderless network. So I don't know who's coming in, but this has the potential, as Paul said before, to reach many different countries, many different people, many backgrounds, to allow for people to come together and talk about certain topics. So I think I finished a little early, but at this point, I'd like to, again, turn it back. Where else do you think there's other innovations happening, and where next? So yeah, go ahead. Oh, there's a microphone coming.
Thank you. Congratulations for your exposure. I will not mention at all the ongoing topic of ChatGPT and all these things, okay? But coming back to digital era, you mentioned, can you make a reflection about how inflation affects the value of information? I mean, you mentioned that in the past we are publishing in a way as we did in the past 400 years. But suddenly, in the last 10 or 20 years, there is an overflow of information. Can you evaluate the effort? So I'm not judging the open access. I think it's morally something we all acknowledge. But as a side effort, can you just mention a word or tell some words about the inflation?
Yeah.
The misvalue of information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, because we've spoken about it a lot here. Growth is the word of the day. And I mean, that follows, any David Harvey time-space compression, globalization, it's all going that way anyway. But I think, what this also means is that kind of system that we had for 400 years was very closed, and only certain people could really access information, could distribute, could contribute to research. And now, we're seeing this really extended. We're seeing, I think a lot more of an open feeling towards research in the same way. So whereas, previously, like I've said, journals would be predisposed to maybe saying no to more articles so that they can keep, quality articles there. Actually, we're seeing, it's really important for young researchers to be able to have the opportunity to publish and to learn about the process and to become part of a research community. And again, that's something that we're seeing happening everywhere. And so one of the things we look towards, as well as, innovation and like fun, interesting new results, it's also just sound science, making sure that we have good research methodologies, that if everything's there and it's decent quality, why can't we publish it? You know, so and I think there's different uses for different types of information, right? So not everything has to be that new innovative thing. That's great, and it will get a really great altmetric score and high citations. But like we've said, there's multiple ways of valuing research. So I think, you know, it's about kind of changing our perspective about what research is and why it's important in those senses.
Let's say a journal is fortunate enough to have a lot of open access articles. Say the journal regularly publishes 8 articles, and over a period of a year or two, it becomes obvious that 6 or 7 of them are favored and they are open access. Doesn't that beg the question of whether it's worth subscribing to a journal which becomes predominantly open access?
So I think that's a really good question. It speaks to, you know, what I said about the kind of budgets and the way they're being reallocated. If you look at how most of our subscriptions are formed, it's through those big deals. So, you know, if one journal is publishing more open access, but other ones aren't, you know, the subscription will still be flowing in the same way, if that makes sense. So the subscriptions are allocated across all of the journals. So a higher percentage of OA wouldn't mean that they would get unsubscribed to. It would just mean they'd be in a better position potentially. So what I would say, you know, until we get to the point, like we're trying to balance out the number of OA articles versus subscription in these deals to make it make sense.
Historically, for many years, publishers had limits on the amount of pages. And they were strictly enforced and the subject of argument. The majority of publishers, large ones, have now flipped. And one can't help but think part of the reason is if your journal publishes 20 articles and only 7 of them are open access, the argument prevails, you still should take a subscription because the majority of articles are behind a paywall. So one suspects that that idea might have intruded into the policy change to have expanded number of pages, maybe subconsciously at least. So that's been a fundamental change.
Yeah.
However, a greater change we're at the start of, which is to see changes in the distribution of information. In Japan a few years ago, I was showing devices that had no screens. Your pocket phone or your laptop projects whatever screen you want. And this has existed for some time, but the cost is a factor right now. However, I'm sure within the next 5 or 10 years, the screens will have a demise. So for at least some people, they'll be able to have a small screen or a large screen coming out of their device. A second thing that is happening are hybrid conferences. This is going to 11 countries, and there's lots of people in Sydney who can have a choice of these rooms, and some societies are now calling these meeting rooms studios. So it's become a studio where I remember many years ago, I went to with my parents to a radio show in New York, which always projected the idea of lushness and high fashion. I was very disappointed that everybody there looked like they were waiting in a barber shop, and they were very well, sloppily dressed, but they were praising each other's couture and everything else. The technology is ahead of the publishing in some respects. And people are going to want to see little video clips when they want to, like footnotes. Whether the hybrid conference, some societies have given up on meeting in person. They are just doing hybrid, or they're doing a version of hybrid. They are doing just online conferences. So one thinks that these journals are going to have to change in a very dramatic way and very soon to take advantage of the technology, because anybody under the age of 30 or 40 has expectations that exceed what the printed word can provide them with. Another aspect of this has been the demographic revolution with a sharp diminishing in college-age students, so that universities are being shoveled towards being online, and they're going to want online curriculum coming from the journals to a respect. So the learned societies who do not conform to the technological demands and what the universities want, and they want curriculum, and professors want to be able to download into their courses. All kinds of things are happening, and one wonders if there is enough running scared in the publishing industry. Is the publishing industry quite up on the danger of these changes?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's where that research is published in the 21st century research in the 20th century, former 17th century, you know, we're really aware that we're behind here. And, you know, it's a taking all hands on deck to really try and bring it back up. I know talking to our technology experts at WAL, you know, because there is just so much complexity and layering to a publishing process. You know, it's not like a shopping website. There's so much that goes into each page. It can be a bit more of a handful, especially with that legacy, to be able to completely digitalize everything. But it is definitely on our list. And actually we'll be talking, you and I, Paul, about these changes as well as time goes forward. But yes, like I said, you know, we're making steps where possible towards these changes, embedding videos, not quite as footnotes, but they're in the articles, and we are moving beyond the printed word as fast as we can. So I appreciate hearing your ideas and insights into what you think that might look like.
Okay. So in your presentation, you spoke a lot about researchers and authors, but I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about peer review, increase in research, increase in articles, increase in people who need to look at, who need to be involved in peer review, need to be trained in peer review, and just how that fits into this digital move forward. Also, just one quick note, a lot of publishers are putting together educational services to create syllabi for universities, but peer review was my main question.
Yes. Yeah, and just to note, yeah, that's our partner solutions. Our team are working towards that. They've done a scholarly kitchen post about it, and they have a website. So yeah, peer review. Of course, again, with this more is more change, that's going to put more pressure, and that is definitely a place where we're again needing to see some innovation. One of the new things we're trying to really implement across all of our journals is refer and transfer networks, and this is where, you know, journals work together with other similarly topics journals. It got described as like mountains, where some are peaked off the same mountain and others in a range, and some can like maybe see the other mountain from the top. But essentially these research networks allow for articles to be transferred between them as necessary. So obviously every journal has a scope, it has its aims. And actually, when you look at the reasons why editors reject articles, most of the time it's because the research isn't within the scope of the journal. So if that's the main reason, what can we do to, you know, make the most of the time and effort of authors? We can create an easy channel which reflects the paths they're already taking, and along those paths we can pass along the peer review as well. So that's one way that we can work towards reducing peer review, you know, creating those connections across our journals, really make the most of a network of researchers. You know, there's some great minds there, and the more that we can all work together with these collaborative tools, such as refer and transfer, but also, you know, we've recently launched an editor network. It means that we can really bring together everybody to make this higher load a bit more manageable. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I mean, I know I've said where else, where next. I mean, I'm also open to just Q&A more generally. So, but yeah. Cool. Hey.